This is Sherlock with Elementary Airsoft, and today we'll be looking at the LCT LC-3 A3, also known as the G3. We're going to be taking a look at its internals. This may end up being part of the larger G3 review, but it was requested that I go over the internals by some folks on Reddit, so that's what we're going to cover today. I'll go through and note a couple things I'm changing, a couple things I think maybe could have been a bit better, and just kind of go over what's what. So start out with the Gearbox shell itself. It is reasonably well made. I did go and I did radius the corners of the Gearbox a bit, but it didn't seem like they had done that. Our bushings here, or bearings, these are 9mm bearings, and a lot of people are like, oh yeah, they're using bearings. Really, to me, unless you're going with a really heavy loaded build, you can probably run these just until they break. And being that they're 9mm, you have a larger bearing, which also means that sort of your quality and stuff doesn't need to be as high as if it was like a 6mm bearing that it was replacing. So being that the bearings are larger, they should last a bit longer without needing some fancy pants modify ones or anything like that. And so I'm going to keep running them, and I'd expect them to last pretty good amount of time. So I wouldn't be too worried by the fact that it has bearings. Internally, the gun came shimmed actually quite well. There was only one that I really adjusted shimming on, and I believe that was our bevel gear here. Air seal out of the box was actually quite excellent. The nozzle that it does come with is an O-ring nozzle, so kudos for that. However, at least mine, I didn't get a good air seal on the nozzle, so I did acquire a SHS. It's a G3 nozzle. However, size-wise, they are slightly different. The SHS one is decimal dust smaller. We're talking like 0.01 millimeters. I personally don't think that will be an issue, but I will try it and find out. The cylinder head here, if you can get it back off, is actually rather nice. It is a double O-ring design. So that gives good, I think it helps contribute to your good air seal in the cylinder. Get it back out. Cylinder is ribbed. Full cylinder, so no ports. I did also note on mine the padding that comes on the cylinder head popped out rather easily, so I replaced that with 3/16 7 durometer sorbo pad. I like to use sorbos because they absorb a bit more energy and help produce impacts, whether or not it could be debatable whether or not they have a huge impact in the field or long term of the gun. Spring is a non-linear type. If I was to take a guess, probably an M120, shooting around 400, low 400s. Before break-in, tappet plate, selector plate, both nylon, those seem good. Your safety switch also of a nylon construction, that was good. The piston head here, I believe, is a bearing piston head, so it's got the set of bearings like it does down here on the spring guide, which is steel and bearings, so that's quite good there on both sides. Like I said, the air seal here was good, no adjustments. It supported metal piston head, full rack, metal teeth. It's honestly a pretty good set of internals overall. Gears, I've never, I guess I should have prefaced this as I've never owned an LCT, I never took one apart. So overall, internally, just give you a right here in the middle because that makes no sense, but I'm overall pretty happy with the gearbox and the quality of the internals. My biggest gripe probably would be the motor, but because it's just a ferrite can, not like a high torque, which would be a lot better. But it's an okay ferrite can. Gears, they seem of a good quality and construction, so I have no worries there. The AR latch, once again, no worries there. The spring is reasonably strong, so it may become the AR latch from hell, trying to put it back together. AKA, I mean, it shoots and flies out all over the place. Some places they use a bit weaker spring, so it doesn't do that. But once again, not really worried. There's some Phillips as well as some Allen key screws that are in the gearbox. They're just your black and steel ones with a bit of, I don't know if it's either nylon or they had some thread lock on them. What's pretty cool, and what I like a lot, honestly, is the trigger is steel, which is pretty sweet if you ask me. Reasonably heavy spring. Go to the inside of the gearbox here quick. Trigger sled and layout. There isn't any major defects in the moldings, so no real big concerns there. So yeah, I'd say overall the gearbox is pretty good. I'd say take it apart, relube it, shim it if it needs it, and you're pretty much good. I wouldn't say any of these key parts really need an upgrade. You could check your air nozzle and potentially replace it. I may follow back up if I find that this guy is too short, which, like I said, I don't really think it'll be an issue. With the Crytac Vector, on the other hand, it is. I didn't make a video on that, but I may. So I got another new nozzle for it, but yeah. Overall, pretty good. The motor and the grip setup holds it in there pretty securely, so I don't have any worries there. The one thing, here's one criticism. I'm not sure how I feel on it, and I'm not sure if this will make much difference. But, so our spring guide in here, I have this little thing set up in here. He would just sit here. Granted, he's somewhat locked into position. It can wobble a bit, even when it's under tension here from the spring. So, because there's nothing at all that screws into the back. So what I did is I took a M4 just cap head screw. There's plenty of room in the body for this, and a fender washer, and I'm just going to screw it into the back of it just to eliminate any of that wobble. So when that's all together and screwed in, this just won't move anywhere. I think, and once again, it's more so opinion based. I think it would have been a good idea for them to include something like that. But once again, it's pretty simple for you to get your hands on an M4 screw and a washer. So I'm not overly upset there. Trigger contacts are alright. Right here, I don't know if you can notice, but it's wired for MOSFET, because that's one of the other things they'll do. I run LiPos. If you run LiPos, you should run a MOSFET. Pretty much just it. Internally, pretty good. So I'll go through and complete our assembly. One thing too that I'll comment real quick while I'm working on the internals is just comment on the housing real quick while I have it apart, which is honestly, maybe you people who used and have owned LCT AKs are already like, oh, it's not that impressive. We see that all the time. But the steel that they use to make the housing is astounding. It's 1.5 millimeters thick. This is a serious piece of metal right here. It's not going anywhere, which is incredibly impressive. Yeah, I'll probably touch on it again while doing a full review, but internally and the build of it is great. Pretty much everything's steel, but like I said, overall the gearbox, I really don't think you have a whole lot to worry about. Check your shimming when you get it. Remember too, when you're shimming involving bearings, you don't want to do it super tight, because you don't want outward pressure being applied on those bearings, so which will essentially cause them to burn out faster, because the bearings will wear into the tracks and then they'll die on you. So you want it tight, or you want it just snug. So definitely don't go too tight on them. Other than that, I'll lube it back up, put it back together, and it should be good to go. And then I'll do a full body review, and this may be in the middle. Thanks. Okay, I figured I'd go over reassembly quick, because I'm here in a camp and I was putting it back together, and I'll basically show you the process in reverse of how to take it apart. Got my gearbox reassembled, my little knot in the back. One thing I wanted to note quick is, because I was running additional wires through here, I did have to remove 2 posts that are designed to keep the original much lighter wires in the slots here. So no harm really done, but I just took a Dremel and ground them down so they wouldn't be stabbing my new wires here. And then that, pretty straightforward, and back together pretty easily. Actually, nothing really shot out too, so I will give them props there. The AR latch, the tappet plate, trigger, those all stayed put nice enough for me to reassemble the gearbox without having like 8 sets of hands. But over quick, so you have your lower assembly here, kind of a lot like an M4-ish. I know it totally doesn't look anything like an M4, but so you drop that in here. Now the weird part is this pin. So the pin that goes, so the equivalent of where the rear body pin goes in an M4, it needs to go through gearbox and the body here, and then we have this interesting looking cotter pin. Woo! Are you going to focus on it? So we put that through both sides of the gearbox pin. Play nice here. There we go. And then this cotter pin slips in on the left side, so you wanted to keep the notch for the pin on the left. I'm going to take a screwdriver here and help just snap it in and home. That essentially is what holds the pin, because I think I mentioned before, like the steel plate's only like 1.5 millimeters thick here. So there we go. Orientating it here, trying to keep best I can to stay on camera. I'd say this may be one of the bigger pin butts, but there we go. That's locked in. Part 1, and then part 2, you're going to want to take the, I don't know what it actually is in the real world, but I always think of it as the trigger pin because it's near the trigger. Somebody will probably yell at me for calling it the wrong thing. But this, you want to find the knurling, which on mine is this end. Then you look at the body, and it's the opposite side of the selector switch. It goes there because you can see the slight star pattern. So we're going to want to put it so both pins you punch out from the side with the selector. I'm just going to make sure that those little spots line up, and that we're lined up over here. And then I will grab a pin punch. And I'll use just a small hard mallet. Prop you up. Some wood. Just give it a couple little taps, make sure that you're still in line. Give it like one more, because it wasn't quite all the way through. Ta-da. That's that, that's good. Selector switch is working, and I can see the tappet plate moving, so that's good. So we have all that. I'll put the other ends on these wires at a later point. So next we have the grip. Pretty much straightforward, like an M4 grip. Drop the wires through it. Honestly, in a lot of ways, it's quite similar to an M4. I guess the only difference is probably the next step in assembly. So got that pushed on, all nice. The only sort of interesting part here is they included this metal plate. It may be actually stuck to your plastic up here when you take it apart, but it serves to keep your screws here from damaging the plastic, which is actually pretty cool, a pretty good idea. It's basically a giant washer. So now I'm going to thread my wires through there, drop him down. And now you want to make sure that he's the right way so the screw holes line up with the screw holes. It has little notches for these sort of cylinders that support our screws for the bottom plate. So then I will go and see, where's my Phillips? Those are bigger ones that will work. So good to work in a well-lit area. Just screw those in. Don't want to over tighten anything. Just still snug. Or maybe just a touch more. Because you really don't want to over tighten it, so you either strip out the heads or the threads, or make it too tight where you'd end up stripping out the heads next time around. That's that. I'm going to double check too at this point that there's nothing or none of my wires in here are crossing the where the motor goes in. So there's that little opening that the one wire will leave across, so you always want to double check that, so when you stick your motor in there, it isn't going to jam them and break anything. And of course, what I didn't do is orientate the motor correctly. You're going to want to do that. So be mindful of your positive and negative terminals so that they are on the right side of where your wires are. They honestly did a really good job with the grip. It really conforms to the motor. There's like hardly any play, if that, in there, so the motor doesn't go flying around. At this point, our Gearbox 2 is solidly in here. There's like no wobble. I know I've had some like M4s and whatnot where there's some wobble. So that's overall pretty good, I think. Or good design work on their part. Just gonna bend my motor contacts here so I can pump them in a bit better. Slide them over. Sometimes need a little sort of help. Okay, so those are in place, and then you're going to want to orientate your wires kind of away. Oops. So the only kind of aggravating part, their motor height adjustment. I don't know if there's a particularly good way to do this, but it's a small disc. So I'm trying to remember which way this goes. Yeah, So there's one side of this that has a little slant on it, and that's going to go towards the back of the grip. So here's the other trick: is there's these blades or paddles designed to keep your wires essentially away from the cage some. You want to make sure that those actually push the wires around so it firmly seats down on the motor itself. Otherwise, if it's squishing those down, it may cause your motor to push in too far. That's just a general observation, general tip. Thread these in. And there you go. And you can adjust your motor height with that grip screw there. Like I said, overall really solid. So putting the rest of it together, or quickly the reverse steps, what I do, pull these 2 screws, pull off the floor plate, pull out the motor with 2 screws in there, pull off the grip, flip it over to the side with the selector switch, and we're going to punch the trigger pin, which is kind of hard to access. He's most easily accessed when it's on safe, or you could actually flip it above safe when the upper receiver isn't on. So you punch him out, and then what you're going to want to do is kind of use like a flathead or something, spin around that counter pin, and then just pop him up, knock out that pin, pulls right out, pretty easy. The wires, they just route back over these lugs. Pretty simple. So, upper receiver, make sure your barrel and hop-up unit is aligned and in place so it can pop in. And then what we're going to do here is, I'm trying to remember this. So essentially you start out sliding it so that there's some gap, and once we get, let's see, where is it? Hereabouts. We're going to start a body frame here. So the upper casting or the upper receiver is going to, these little tabs are going to go in between the, lower, so it gets grip. And here you'll need some force to pop it in. Because it's pretty tough metal. Or pretty thick metal, rather. So let's go after. You want to be careful so you aren't pinching the wires. To back off just a bit so I can keep, there we go. So you need to hold your barrel into place so we can sort of take it in at a slight angle like this, which will allow us to mate up the front and keep from binding on the nozzle interaction with the hop-up unit. Then we can, because this pin here, he needs to clear that little notch, so that's where you have to get before you can pull it up. Really pull the two together, and then you're going to slide it the rest of the way home. Really is the case. So I'd say this is probably the most aggravating part, and it was honestly one of the more interesting parts. Bit of mallet to assist taking it apart, because it does take a good amount of force. Put it together, and then we're going to just go until this front hole here is lined up for this body pin. I believe it goes in from the right side. It shouldn't really matter, and I'm just gonna tap him through. And ta-da, gearbox assembled. I'm gonna double check the hop-up unit, which in its current setup, there's like a shim on it, so it sits up really tight with the gearbox, even though it's spring-loaded. So it's pretty good. And then we're just going to put back on the stock. Normally you would have your wires here, like with an end on it. Okay, yeah, that's perfect length. So this will be a bit of a mess for me because they're all kind of different lengths. Feed them through the center hole here. I'll share it. When I'm done, I'm going to slide some heat shrink over this just to keep them as an easy to access bundle, but for the sake of the time being, I will just fiddle them through. Maybe. They just like to grab onto the plastic stuff. Oh well. We'll skip it for now. But then, yeah, you're just going to slide your stock back on, drop the two body pins through, and ta-da, reassembled, good to go.